You are now listening to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, brought to you by Buckeye Grove. For all the latest Buckeyes news, analysis, reaction, and the best Ohio State community on the entire internet, head over to BuckeyeGrove.com or follow us on Twitter at Ohio State Rivals. Without any further delay, it's time to get unscripted, broadcasting from Podcast Central, a place that is not his mother's basement.
Hey, Mom! We get some meatloaf!
We promise. Here's your host, Kyle Lamb.
Hey, Mom! The meatloaf!
Good Friday, everybody. Welcome back to the Unscripted Ohio podcast, presented by BuckeyeGrove.com. I'm your host, Kyle Lamb. It's good to be back with you. Look, we got a lot that we need to talk about. So we kind of touched on Tuesday in our bonus edition of the podcast a little bit about some of the coaching changes. We discussed Al Washington. We discussed Greg Madison. There were some Corey Raymond rumors. Of course, that did not pan out. He is going to be sticking with LSU, but it looks like Ohio State's staff is set, at least stands for the possibility that Greg Cedrala could be leaving Ohio State. We still don't have any finality on that, but there are rumors that he may take off. So here are the things that I want to talk about. We do have to get into the staff, and I'm going to talk about what I think about it now that it looks like it is set. We're very close to being set. Later in the show, I want to talk a little bit about Ohio State basketball. Boy, they had a big snafu this week at Rutgers, falling by 3 points to the Scarlet Knights, and that was an unfortunate loss. I don't think it's as embarrassing as it seems on the surface to Rutgers. Look, I'm not going to pretend that this is not a game that they should not have won, because they should. Anytime you go play Rutgers, especially in a Big Ten that is as strong as it is this year from top to bottom, you just gotta go tough it out, and you gotta get that win, because there's not a lot of easy wins in this league to be had, especially in this given year. So I will talk about Ohio State basketball here. They've got a chance to get back on the winning track on the road on Saturday against Iowa. But the big story that I do want to get into, so we thought that with Justin Fields transferring to Ohio State, and that is obviously final, we thought there was going to be a pretty interesting battle shaping up this spring between Fields and Tate Martell. But then we had two bombshells come out on Thursday. The first bombshell being that Tate Martell apparently already is in the NCAA transfer portal. And for those that don't remember, the portal is new this year. It is a database basically of names of student athletes that are intending to transfer. So they go to their schools, they say, hey, I want to transfer, I want to talk to other schools. And so their school basically puts them in this database, and what that means is that anybody else can then contact the student and go from there. So a coach, in this case, Tate Martell went in the database yesterday, so that means that anybody from Miami or UCLA or West Virginia or UNLV or any number of schools rumored to potentially be a destination for Tate Martell can reach out and say, hey, we want you to come here. The second bombshell that we learned, by the way, on Thursday is that his name is Tathaniel, as in Nathaniel, but not Tate, Tathaniel. Tathaniel Martell. That was interesting. That I joked about this on Twitter. You can catch me, of course, on Twitter at KYLAM8. I joked about this on Twitter. This is almost as interesting as when we learned on Seinfeld that Kramer's first name is Cosmo. That was just an interesting anecdote. And that's not going to be the first Seinfeld reference I make today. If you can't tell, if you haven't been able to tell from following me before or listening to the podcast before, you're going to find out that I am a big Seinfeld nerd, one of my favorite shows of all time. So let me get back to Tate here for a second. Okay, so Ohio State isn't, first, they're in a precarious position, and I'm going to talk about how this, I should clarify. Let me back a step here. Beep, beep, beep. That's my truck backing up. Okay, I'm going to go in reverse. I should clarify that just because Tate Martell is in this portal, this database of names, it does not mean that he is set or committed to transferring, by the way. There's still the possibility exists he could talk to a bunch of schools and come back to Ohio State. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I've been saying this, and if you followed me on this subject, I said from the day one when the Justin Fields rumors started coming about and linking him to Ohio State, I said, if he winds up at Ohio State, I'm telling you right now, I don't think Tate Martell winds up lasting through the spring, past the spring, I should say, with Ohio State. And I think that is coming to fruition right now. And this does, if he does transfer, and look, I think once he goes down the avenue, the channel, the path of talking to other schools within the portal, and then them reaching out to him, I think he's gone. And I think this is probably a benefit. I think he will finish this semester at Ohio State because it behooves him to do so. Because if he waits to transfer until after the school year, then he will, reportedly will be graduating after this spring. And that means that he can transfer as a graduate transfer, which means he can go to his next destination without sitting out. So it is important for him to finish out this term at Ohio State. Even though he's in the portal, he'll probably finish out Ohio State. And that puts Ryan Day in an interesting, precarious position here. Because if you're Ryan Day, you don't want him to transfer because this leaves you potentially in very thin ice as far as depth for next season. Because if there's that 1% chance that Justin Fields does not get his waiver, and we talked about this, I explained the waiver process, I think he's going to get the waiver. But if there's even that 1% chance that Justin Fields is not eligible to play in 2019, then you've got Matthew Baldwin on the roster. And if Tate Martell is gone, that's it. You've got Matthew Baldwin, as of right now, eligible to play in 2019. So Ryan Day probably does not want Tate Martell to transfer, but he's got a really uphill battle to climb he's got an uphill climb here. He's got a big battle in front of him because I think as soon as Justin Fields said he was transferring to Ohio State, I think Tate Martell, regardless of what he said in the past several weeks, I think Tate Martell was already gone. And if Justin Fields does not get the waiver and you've only got Matthew Baldwin, you'll want Tate around. But I think he's going to finish out the semester and then leave, which means Ryan Day really has to make a decision. Do you let him play in spring practice? You let him play in the spring game, knowing you really, really want to keep him around, and maybe there's a chance he will change his mind and not leave, but you also run the risk of, this guy, maybe he's just not into it, maybe he's a problem in the locker room, and it's just awkward, if he's participating when he's gone. So I don't know what Ryan Day does here. You want him to stick around, but you also don't want him to be around knowing he's out the door. So if Tate Martell commits to this, he goes in the portal, and he really just does not want to stick it out at Ohio State, then I think Ryan will just say, hey, look, finish out the school year. We're not going to take your scholarship away. They actually cannot take a scholarship away once they get past, I think it's a 7 or 10 day mark. There's a cutoff. It's called the census date. That's when you can't drop your classes anymore, and everything gets finalized. And once you get past that mark, by rule, Ohio State has to continue to let the athlete finish out the school year on a scholarship. Okay, they can't drop the scholarship for that semester once they get that point. But I don't think they would anyway. That would be bad precedent. It'd be a bad precedent to set. You're just not going to take the scholarship or the financial aid away from a guy that's transferring. That would set a very bad precedent. That's not going to happen. But I do wonder if Ohio State elects to bring Tate back into spring practice or not. Now, look, I want to talk a little bit about the other aspect of this because there's a lot of people with opinions on Tate Martell transferring. I I have no problem. Let me preface this by saying I want to pat him on the back. I want to applaud him because he is in a position to graduate early. Okay, and I know a lot of people ask, well, how after 2 years could he possibly be on pace to already graduate? Well, it's pretty simple. He was an early enrollee. So when he first came in for the spring semester a couple years ago. Then he was here for the summer. And then he was here for the winter and spring semesters. So that's 4 right there. Then he was in the summer again between his freshman and sophomore year. And then the fall semester this past year, and now this spring semester. So that's 7 semesters right there. And you add in, all it takes is just a couple extra credit hours, per semester, and then all of a sudden you're on pace for graduating 8 semesters, condensed into 7. So that's why it looks like Tate is on pace to graduate this upcoming spring. And so you got to give Tate credit for that. Look, it's he's worked hard. He's obviously taken extra courses to get where he's at, and that's commendable. And there's nothing wrong with Tate Martell transferring. Seeing the writing on the wall, you've got the super generational quarterback coming in with actually an extra year of eligibility than you do. And I don't think that matters because, look, Justin Fields, if he's anywhere near as good as we think he's going to be or anywhere near as good as his potential, then I promise you Justin Fields is only going to be around for 2 years. Maybe even 1 year if he's not eligible this year, because he would have to sit out this year if he's not eligible, and then he would probably be a 1-year starter and then be off to the NFL. But if you're Ohio State, you're hoping he's eligible this year for a number of reasons now, not just because of depth, but also because with his talent, you would like to get him on the field for as many games as you can. But, so you don't want Tate to leave, but understand with Justin Fields ahead of him, there's nothing wrong with him doing what's best for his career and his livelihood. And I don't think anybody out there really criticizes him for leaving. But there's an issue that I see here. The reason people are criticizing is because you can't go out and make all these comments that he's made. You can't call out Justin Fields and say he's never earned it, he's never done anything at Ohio State, and I'm going to stick around and battle this 100%. I'm going to be the starter next year. I'm going to win. I'm not afraid of competition. You can't say all this and then bail a couple days after he enrolls. He didn't even give it a chance. And to be fair, maybe he sticks this out. But if you're going into the portal this soon and looking for suitors, then I certainly got to question whether you're going to stick it out. But it's a bad look. And what people are saying here is if you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. Okay, recall back a couple weeks ago. Remember, I called this. I'm not trying to break my arm here, patting myself on the back, but I called this. I said, all those comments that Tate was making, it wasn't coming from a place of confidence. This was false bravado. Okay, Tate was feeling insecure about the situation. And I can't necessarily blame him for that. You're going to be a little bit bothered. Anybody deep down is going to be bothered by, somebody really good being brought in to do the job that you think you were supposed to do. But what I don't like is I feel like people are making him out to be a victim. And I see this a lot, and people are saying, well, he's given his blood, his sweat, and his tears, and imagine thinking he'd be the starter. And okay, I think everybody understands how to be in that position, and it sucks. But he's not a victim. Okay, Ohio State did exactly what they should be doing. There's nothing aggressive about this. There's nothing underhanded about this. Ohio State needed another quarterback, and they went out and got the best guy possible they could find. And that's what Ohio State should be doing. That's what every program that wants to win games should be doing. And Tate Martell understands that. He came to Ohio State knowing what Ohio State football is. It's the best being the best. But I don't want to make this guy out to be a victim, okay? It's like, I understand there are some people that are taking the criticism too far and ripping this kid to shreds for some things that maybe should be criticized for, and other things he shouldn't be criticized for. Like I said, I don't think anybody's criticizing him for transferring. I think he should be criticized for making those comments and then not backing them up. If you're going to talk the talk, you got to walk the walk. It reminds me, And then I mentioned I was going to make another Seinfeld reference, and this is it right here. It reminds me of the episode where Jerry goes in to rent a car, and they said, "Well, I'm sorry, but that car's been rented out." And he's like, "Rented out?" He's like, I reserved it." She's like, "I understand, sir. We have your reservation. We just don't have the car." And Jerry is like, well, anybody can anybody can take the reservation, but the important part is to hold the reservation. That's the most important part of the reservation. And the clerk is like, "Well, I know what a reservation is, sir." And he's like, "I don't think you do." And it kind of reminds me of this. Look, anybody can talk the talk here. Okay, you could say, "I'm going to win the job, not afraid of competition," but you can't run off the first sign that you're going to have an actual quarterback battle on your hands. Okay, you got to see this through. You got to stick it out at least through spring. I'd like to see him stick it out the whole year, and I understand if he doesn't, but I want to see really back it up. If you're going to write the check, you got to cash it. Stick it out and be an actual, if you really want to be a part of the program and you want to win and you want to, battle for the job, you got to see it through. And like I said, there's nothing wrong if he wants to transfer. I just don't like how he's doing it. So, look, the problem is not with Tate transferring if he does. It's just how he's going about this. You can't say all those things. And I told you, this wasn't coming from a place of confidence. This was just false bravado. He was feeling insecure about it, and I don't blame him. So what does Ohio State do? Let's say Tate does transfer. Where does Ohio State go? I saw this out there. Pete Thamel, a few other people in the national media brought up the name Jalen Hurts, who, by the way, also showed up in the NCAA transfer portal on Thursday. Now, Jalen Hurts has already graduated. Okay, this past December the 18th, I believe it was, Jalen Hurts walked down with many of his cohorts there at the University of Alabama and got his degree. Good for him. He is a starter that has played in 28 games for Alabama. He's actually played in like 31 games, I think it is, or more. It's been more than that, actually. But he's 26-2 as a starter. Look, the guy's been through the grind. He's not the greatest passer in the world, but he's been through the grind. He's a smart player. He can make plays with his feet and his arm. He's not the greatest quarterback, and I kind of hesitate to envision Jalen Hurts as a starting quarterback at Ohio State next year if Fields isn't eligible, because Lord knows we've had these kind of conversations with JT Barrett at quarterback. I don't want to relive all that, but JT was a polarizing quarterback for the Ohio State fan base, and I kind of wonder if Jalen Hurts wouldn't be equally polarizing. But anyway, he's 26-2 as a starter, and then his name has been floated as a possibility for Ohio State. Now, he's already graduated, and he just went into the system yesterday. The situation here is Alabama just started classes on Wednesday. They're not within they're not to their census date yet, which is, I believe, on the 16th. So depending on what school he's interested in, he could technically transfer here to many other schools within this next 5 to 6 days if he wanted to. I don't know what kind of expedited timetable he might be on. Maybe like Tate Martell, he'll finish out the spring. Unlike Tate, who needs to finish out the spring to be able to transfer without sitting out, Jalen could transfer right now because he's already graduated, so he would not have to sit out. I don't know if he's going to do that now or if he's going to wait. But if, in fact, Justin Fields, let's say for argument's sake, Justin Fields is not eligible, that means we have to figure out what Ohio State would do for the starting quarterback this year if Tate is gone. And as far as the Hurts scenario is concerned, this is tricky because if Hurts transfers now, Ohio State is not in play for him. That's just not a good fit, knowing that Justin Fields could wind up being the starting quarterback. So Jalen Hurts would not transfer to Ohio State right now if he transfers at this moment. So the upside here is if he waits and does not transfer until the end of the semester, well, if they find out Justin Fields is not going to get his waiver, which we've talked about in the past, I think it's going to take a couple months. Now, his attorney, Tom Mars, is talking confidently that it's going to happen within the next 6 weeks. Look, with the NCAA, I don't care how confident you are. There's just nothing that's a foregone conclusion. Tom Mars may end up being right, but we just don't know if it's going to wind up being 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, maybe even 14 to 16 weeks. Okay, so it's just hard to say. But let's say we're on the Shea Patterson timetable where we find out Justin Fields is eligible in April. The tricky part here is, if Jalen Hurts, Justin Fields, Jalen Hurts, I will not get these two mixed up. If Jalen Hurts decides he's transferring this week, Ohio State is out. Ohio State will have to look elsewhere in the event that Justin Fields does not get eligible. And they're probably going to have to find another quarterback anyway, because I don't think you want to go to battle. I don't think you want to go into the season with 2 scholarship quarterbacks ready to go, especially Matthew Baldwin, who has never played a game at Ohio State. It's coming off a knee surgery. So I don't think that's an ideal solution. So Ohio State will need a quarterback, but Jalen Hurts probably not in play if he transfers this week. If he waits, that's great news, because then Ohio State, if they need another quarterback, because Fields would not be eligible, that's a perfect situation for Jalen Hurts. The flip side is, because he's waiting until after the spring, he's not going to be able to go to spring football. You're not going to have him with those extra couple weeks of practice. Look, that's not a deal breaker, and I think at Ohio State, in that situation, would be so desperate, I don't think they mind. It just means you're not going to get Hurts on campus until the summer, and you're not going to get him truly involved in the system until fall. So it's not an ideal scenario here. I don't think the Jalen Hurts scenario is even going to be necessary for Ohio State. I think there will be other grad transfers out there that will be coming in and being willing to be a backup for Justin Fields this season. Maybe there are some guys out there that just want to win. They're talented enough to be a capable backup. But if for that 1% chance where Justin Fields does not get his waiver, and it is possible, as much as you can be confident and optimistic he's getting it, there's still that small chance. So in that particular scenario, then yeah, if Jalen Hurts sits it out, I think he would be a good option later this spring. So that is the quarterback situation in a nutshell. As I said, I'm not crazy about Tate's comments. I'm fine with him transferring, but look, just remember, Tate committed to 2 different schools before he committed to Ohio State. You probably saw the report from Kyle Rowland that came out Wednesday on the Toledo Blade, or Thursday on the Toledo Blade, that he had to be talked into staying this past fall. That's actually, believe it or not, I alluded to this vaguely on one of my podcasts a few weeks ago. He's actually almost left the team like 4 or 5 times. They've continually had to massage his ego and talk him into staying in the program. So this should not be a surprise. And that's why I said this was never about confidence with him. This was always something that I saw coming. As soon as I saw Justin Fields' name linked with Ohio State, and I said it on the show, I just don't see him sticking around. I don't see him staying and battling for this job, despite what he said. People said to me, well, this is the kind of attitude you want to see from your quarterback. No. The kind of attitude you want to see from your quarterback is the guy that sticks it out in battles. Not what he says. I don't care what you say. Anybody can say this. It's what you actually do when it's time to step up. And, he has got to take ownership and back up those words, and it does not look like he's going to do that, and that's unfortunate. But hey, more power to him. I hope for his sake that he winds up in a good situation if he does leave. And, I think all you can do is wish him well. He's a talented guy, talented kid. He's got a high ceiling still. There's no reason to give up on him. It's just unfortunate. I thought, if you make those kind of comments, you got to back him up. So we'll see what happens there with Tate. So I want to get into back to the basketball team for just a few minutes here. I mentioned at the top, this Rutgers game was really disappointing because Ohio State does not have a large margin for error. Now, obviously, when you only lose one time in the non-conference portion of your schedule, you have built up at least a little bit of a leash, some wiggle room. Ohio State did go on the road and they beat Cincinnati, which may or may not be a tournament team. Cincinnati has a good record. They lost to East Carolina last week. I'm not sure that they're going to have the wins necessary to get into the NCAA tournament, short of winning the Conference USA Championship, but they are definitely a very good basketball team, worthy of at least consideration of the tournament. The Creighton win on the road was a very good win for Ohio State. That looks like an NCAA tournament team as well. They've had some tough losses, but they have played a really good schedule. But Ohio State, so they do have a couple of good non-conference wins. The UCLA win turns out is not going to be a quality win. I don't think there's any such thing as a quality win if you're playing a Pac-12 team this year. That conference has been historically bad. This is no exaggeration. The Pac-12 may actually get 0 at-large bids this year. It is very, very possible that the sole bid will go to the conference championship winner. So Ohio State, at minimum, played a really good schedule, or at least a good enough schedule in the non-conference portion of their schedule. They did enough to give them wiggle room. They didn't really have any bad losses. They have not had any bad losses. And really, this Rutgers team isn't even a bad loss. You look what they've done. They're not a good team, but they lost to Seton Hall by 6. Seton Hall is 12-4. They lost to 5 points on the road to Wisconsin. They lost by 11 to Michigan State. The St. John's team that they lost to is 14-2. That was a competitive game for a good portion of the game, and then it got away from them. Fordham is really the game that everybody looks at and freaks out about. Fordham's actually not a bad team either. I mean, I'm not trying to paint this rosy picture that Rutgers is a great team, but the point is they are competitive and they are not as bad as they've been in the past. But that's not to say Ohio State shouldn't have won that game, because they should have. And Rutgers, even though relative to most other leagues, they're better than some of the worst teams in those other leagues. This is still one of the few games where Ohio State could go on the road and you could say, yeah, they need to win that game. That's a game that they should win. The disappointing thing, I think, for me watching this team right now is they just have not been able to be consistent offensively. Sometimes they're a little too unselfish. I think they overpass. Other times they still take bad shots, and that's kind of expected from a young team, and they do have some inexperienced guys on this team. Luther Muhammad and Dwayne Washington are inexperienced. Musa Jallo is still relatively inexperienced. So this is somewhat a work in progress, but that's 2 games in a row where Ohio State was just out of sync and showed a lack of poise for key stretches. Now, credit them, in that Rutgers game, they got down by double digits and they battled back. It could have gotten away from them, but Luther Muhammad stepped up and made some big shots at times. This is a team that, I still think they're an NCAA tournament team, but the Big Ten is really brutal this year, and there are a lot of landmines. Saturday against Iowa is a landmine. Iowa's been up and down here this year, but they're still a dangerous team, especially at home. So Ohio State, look, it's not a terrible loss at Rutgers, despite, I know the name Rutgers automatically triggers shivers when you think about losing to that team, but it is a better team than it's been in the past. But still, Ohio State just cannot afford losing those type of games because there aren't many of them on the schedule. I believe in this basketball team. It's not a national championship winner this year. Nobody's going to confuse them that. They are, they are what they are offensively. They have limited weapons at their disposal. They have just a finite number of guys that can take over the game and win for them right now. Caleb Wesson is turning into one of those guys. C.J. Jackson has the ability to be one, but we know of his inconsistency. Keyshawn Woods has been really good for this team, but he could be better, especially as a scorer. They need to get those 2 guys, those seniors, Keyshawn Woods and C.J. Jackson, they have to play more consistently. But help is on the way. It may not happen this year. By the way, I think this year their kryptonite clearly is the long athletic team, that especially when they go to zone. Rutgers probably should have stayed in that zone. I know the broadcasters, Stephen Bardo mentioned in the broadcast that he thought, maybe Ohio State was figuring that zone out and you can't stay in it too long. And, maybe partially that's true, but to be honest, I think Rutgers probably should have just stayed there because Ohio State was struggling with that zone. We've seen it at times. We saw it against Syracuse, where they struggled at times with the length and not getting it into spots in the middle and behind the zone. We saw that problem for the first half against UCLA, and we saw it throughout the game up in minor stretches against Rutgers. These long athletic teams playing zone are really giving Ohio State fits right now. Sometimes you can shoot your way out of that, but you really need to have consistent passing, and you got to be patient and not make lazy passes. And that's where Ohio State did get themselves into trouble making some lazy passes against Rutgers. But hey, if it doesn't happen this year, I got to remind you, Ohio State has help on the way. C.J. Walker, the transfer, he'll be a sophomore next year from Florida State. Of course, T.J. Carton, Alonzo Gaffney, and E.J. Liddell. Those three guys are going to be difference makers for Ohio State next year. I don't know how much you've been following them in their senior seasons of high school, but it's a lot of fun to watch. They're all three really good players, and you are going to be very impressed seeing this team next year. So it is going to get there. This year, just enjoy the ride. They're still fun to watch. They give effort. They hustle. They don't give up on games. They're still going to win a lot of games. They'll be a 20-plus game winner this year, and they'll finish in the upper half of the Big Ten. I promise that. They'll make the NCAA tournament. That's my guarantee to you. I know that's always dangerous, but I really believe that. Just enjoy the ride the rest of the year, and we'll see what happens going into next season. But Ohio State basketball, big, important game. They've got to bounce back against Iowa. They cannot afford another loss in the Big Ten, even if it is a road game. They got to get back in the winning column.
Stretch runtime here at Unscripted Ohio. Kick up your feet as we cross the finish line with the Buckeye Beat, the latest in Ohio State news and notes.
Kick the tires and light the fires, Big Daddy.
So let's talk now real quick here. Before we wrap the show up, I want to get into a little bit of a recap because it appears the Ohio State football coaching staff is very close to being set. So I have a few thoughts on it. So let's take it from the top here. We know Ryan Day is obviously the head coach. It was announced on Thursday that Tony Alford will be retained as running backs coach. We already knew Brian Hartline was the permanent wide receivers coach for Ohio State, which he is just killing it on the wide receiver trio. I think I mentioned that a couple weeks ago. But he is really he's a rock star right now, out recruiting, especially those 2020 receivers. He's doing really well with that class. I expect a monster haul in 2020 from Brian Hartline when it comes to wide receivers. So the run game coordinator will continue to be Kevin Wilson as a co-offensive coordinator situation. That was basically his role last year, but it has, basically been expressed as run game coordinator this year. We have, of course, Mike Yurcich. He comes to Ohio State from Oklahoma State. I think this is a fantastic offensive mind. He's been a great offensive coordinator. You look at the numbers in 6 years. 5 of those years, he's had a top 20 offense as ranked by S&P defenses, or S&P offensive efficiency, I should say. So he's been a very, very good offensive mind there for Mike Gundy out at Oklahoma State, and he brings what I think is going to be a very diverse offense and dynamic offense to Ohio State, especially now that he has Justin Fields at his disposal. If not this year, then next year. So on offense, the big question mark right now is Greg Studrawa. As of this moment, it appears Ohio State is trying to keep him. The plan was to keep him. They're not pushing him out. At least that's not my understanding is they are not pushing him out. They have been telling recruits he was going to be their offensive line coach. However, they also want better production, and I think to some extent that has caused him maybe to be a little paranoid about his position with Ohio State right now, and there are rumors that he is looking around at other jobs. We'll see what comes of that, if anything. As of right now, Greg Studrawa is still the offensive line coach for Ohio State, but as I said, we'll monitor that because I don't know if that is going to continue, if that will last or not. On the defensive side of the ball, nothing changing with the defensive line. Larry Johnson, he is the best position coach in America, bar none. Certainly the best defensive line coach, but I think he's the best position coach in America. He will continue to coach the defensive line for Ohio State. He's also been bumped up to associate head coach. And we talked about Al Washington the other day on the podcast. He's young. He's energetic. He was a good recruiter for Michigan. Comes to Ohio State from Michigan. being a Columbus kid. His dad played for Ohio State. He has connections with Ryan Day that date back to his playing days at Boston College. So this is a good fit for Al Washington, a great fit for Ohio State. I think that is going to be a fantastic hire. The defensive backs coach will be Jeff Hafley. Of course, he is the guy that was announced a couple of days ago coming to Ohio State from the San Francisco 49ers. Players were raving about him. Richard Sherman had some good things to say. He apparently was a pretty good recruiter in his days at Rutgers as well, which is one of the things that attracted Ohio State. Remember, he coached for a year with Greg Schiano at Rutgers, as well as a year spent with Ryan Day at the 49ers. So Jeff Hafley comes in, another young guy. He's somebody that could take over in the future, maybe next year or beyond, as full-time defensive coordinator, but he will coach the defensive backs in addition to his role as co-defensive coordinator. And I mentioned the ability of taking over, and that is because Greg Madison, of course, the 69-year-old former Michigan defensive coordinator, been coaching the defensive line the last couple of years. He is coming to Ohio State as well, and he will be the primary defensive coordinator. Now, look, I know there are some concerns over Madison's age, but the guy can coach. It still remains a mystery as to why he stepped back into a smaller role a couple of years ago, and now he appears ready to go back into the defensive coordinator position. I don't know what was the change of heart, but the guy has a proven track record as being a very good defensive coordinator. We'll see how Ohio State does with him, but I really believe this staff together will do really well. I think it's a cohesive unit. They seem to be strategically aligned as far as their desire for scheme and some of their backgrounds. I think this is going to be a very good defense. You know, it looks like Ohio State will have most of the defense back. Draymond Jones, of course, is out for the NFL. B.B. Landers will be gone. But they will have a very young, talented, and deep defensive line coming in. The linebackers will mostly be back. A lot of good young players coming up through the ranks like Pope and Mitchell, and hopefully a step forward from Harrison and Browning and some other guys. And then defensive backs, you know, I talked last week how much I'm excited about seeing Okudah and Wade at the corners, and there's some, even though it was looking like last week Sheffield and Arnett would be gone, now I kind of think Arnett may actually be back. We'll monitor that, but the defensive backfield with Jordan Fuller back and Brendan White, there are going to be some really good players back there. Josh Proctor might be in the mix. So there's a lot there for Jeff Hafley to coach in the defensive backfield and the defense as a whole. The final guy, by the way, the 10th coach that was announced by Ohio State, it broke late in the day on Thursday, Matt Barnes from the University of Maryland. He will be taking over as special teams coach. And remember, Urban Meyer was in charge of the special teams previously. So it will now be, they will have a dedicated special teams coach. That will be Matt Barnes. And he will also serve as a assistant secondary coach. So he will be helping Jeff Hafley and the defensive backfield. So that, folks, it is your 2019 Ohio State football coaching staff, provided there are no unexpected departures or, you know, like I said, Greg Studrawa may or may not be out the door, but we will see. I'm going to assume for the time being that he stays on as offensive line coach for Ohio State. It could be a lot worse. If you saw Michigan State on Thursday, Mark D'Antonio is making changes to his offensive staff, but he's not bringing in any new blood. He's just shuffling guys around. The quarterback coach will become the coordinator, and one of their coordinators will become, or one of the line coach will become, one of their coordinators will become quarterback coach, and one of them will be bumped up to coordinator, or down to coordinator offensive line. I don't know. I'm all confused. I'm confusing myself right now. But just I promise you, they're not bringing anybody new. They're just shuffling guys around like musical chairs. You know, that's basically it. You know, you run around in a circle, and when the music stops, grab a chair. And hopefully for Michigan State's sake, it works. But I got to say, if the offense is that bad, bring in new minds. You don't need a new role or a new position. You need a new, fresh take on something. So very bizarre what's going on there in East Lansing. If we thought it was bad sometimes where Jim Tressel maybe was a little too loyal to some of his guys and didn't make changes quick enough. Remember those days Well, this is 10 times worse. Mark D'Antonio is taking this to a whole new level with this move right here. It's an archaic offense, not working, and he's basically just shuffling the deck chairs on the Titanic. That's basically all this is. So we'll see what happens. I like this staff. I think it's a good cohesive unit. I think the defense is going to be much improved next year, and it's not a shot at Greg Schiano. I think Greg Schiano is a good coach. I just think new blood, new young minds, different scheme, different personnel, really actually similar personnel, but different scheme, trying something new. I think this group, with the existing personnel coming back for Ohio State, I think good times are ahead, both offensively and defensively. I think it is an exciting time to be a Buckeye fan. I really think you will enjoy this tenure in this era. The Ryan Day era, folks, is off to a scintillating start in Columbus. I really think great times will keep rolling for the Ohio State Buckeyes. So that will wrap things up for me today. I hope you continue to follow me on Twitter at KYLam8. Of course, you can catch the show every Monday and Friday on BuckeyeGrove.com. We are on any number of mediums of your choice, by the way. You can catch us on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, and now Spotify as well. In addition to the Unscripted Ohio podcast being up every Monday and Friday, you can also catch the Scarlet and Great podcast with Johnny Lunsford and Corey Thompson every Wednesday here on the Unscripted Ohio Network. So that is going to do things for me for today. I hope you have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday to continue talking more about the coaching changes, more about any personnel changes that may come about. Remember, the deadline for the NFL draft is next week, so if Sheffield or Arnett or any of these other guys do decide to declare, and by the way, I didn't even talk about KJ Hill, and I apologize. KJ Hill coming back. How about that? I'll talk more about that next week, but that was a pleasant surprise. I didn't think KJ Hill would return. I don't think any Buckeye fans really expected that. But KJ Hill is coming back, but we'll get into more of that next week. So hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday, folks. Go Bucks.
You can get new episodes of Unscripted Ohio on Mondays and Fridays exclusively at BuckeyeGrove.com or anytime on SoundCloud, iTunes, Google Play, or Stitcher. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on all things Ohio State.